What amazes me is like
most of the time people come from Michigan
Right. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Journey Church. It's nice to have you with us this morning. I hope you're doing well. You have made it almost through level 9 of this year, okay? So 10 is coming. It's good to be together to worship. We have a sure and a firm foundation in Christ this morning. And so, not just this morning, but every morning, okay, that we are in Christ. And so today we are going to celebrate that fact. So if you would, let's stand together. We're going to pray. We're going to enter into a time of worship. If you would you pray with me? Oh God, we love you. We're thankful for what you've done for us. We're thankful for the sure and firm foundation of Christ. That our salvation is not based on who we are or what we do, but what we do with you, your finished work, and whether we believe or not. And so, Lord, it's by your grace that we believe. It's by your grace that we have salvation through your Son, Jesus, who paid the penalty for sin that we deserve, but only he could pay that we might be righteous. So all of our hope is in Jesus. So today we lift up our worship to you in song, and reading of Scripture, and teaching of your word, and prayer. Lord, would you lift up the broken heart today? Would you be evident in our time? Would you move among us? We pray in Jesus' name. I'm going to sing a song. We introduced it a few weeks ago, but I think you may remember it. If not, just learn it with us then.
extol you, my God and King, and bless your name forever and ever. Every day I will bless you, and praise your name forever and ever. Great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised, and his greatness is unsearchable. One generation shall commend your works to another, and shall declare your mighty acts. On the glorious splendor of your majesty, and on your wondrous works I will meditate. They shall speak of the might of your awesome deeds, and I will declare your greatness. They shall pour forth the fame of your abundant goodness, and shall sing aloud of your righteousness. The Lord is gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love. The Lord is good to all, and his mercy is over all that he has made.
The last line, the Lord is good to all. He is a God of goodness. We cannot forget that, and we're going to sing about that today.
Oh, your mercy never fails me. All my days I've been held in your hands. From the moment that I wake up till I lay my head, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. Every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God.
is Mitch. Would you come lead us in prayer?
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for just all the many blessings you have. It's been perfect for us. I pray that this worship was beautiful to you, that we just lifted it to you, Lord. I pray today that you do a work in this building. I pray for the message that you're bringing us, that we hear it, Lord. That you just come inside of this building. We'll leave here loving you more. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
It's good to be with you this morning. We've been walking chapter by chapter through the book of Daniel. We're going to do that again today. We'll be in Daniel chapter 8 today. Daniel chapter 8. Now, here's the thing. This is apocalyptic literature, which means it's very strange, provocative literature that uses symbols to talk about a current reality or a future reality to come. And that's exactly what we see here in Daniel chapter 8. We looked last 2 weeks at Daniel chapter 7, where there's all these beasts that come out of the Mediterranean, and how God was going, and these beasts represented these nations that would come and rule the world for a time, and then they would leave. We talked about the Babylonian Empire, we talked about the Persian Empire, we talked about the Greek Empire, we talked about the Roman Empire. And those empires have come and gone, and that's what was being predicted there. Now, we have to step back here, and Daniel's going to talk about a different thing, a different part of the scope of history. This is going to be about the Medo-Persian Empire and the Greek Empire, and how they find each other, and how the Greeks overtook the Medo-Persian. Now, I knew when you walked into church today, you were thinking, you know what I need in my life? I need to know about how the Medo-Persians were taken over by the Greeks. I know that was you. When you walked in this morning, you're like, bless God, I need something in my life, and that is what I need. I need to know about the Persians and the Greeks. Well, here's the thing. If we can understand and identify who's in this passage, I believe that it has something to say to us today about our faith, about how we ought to live and walk, and be an encouragement to us today. Does that sound good? So you got to bear with me. If you can hang with me through us identifying who these different players are, at the end, I believe that there are some things that will jump out to you and to us that will be helpful for us in our walk today as believers in Jesus. And so if you would, I'm going to do something we haven't done exactly. I'm going to ask you to listen to me read Daniel chapter 8, okay? Follow along. It'll be on the screen. And this is going to require extra attention, because if not, it becomes Charlie Brown's teacher. You know what I mean? If you go back and all Charlie Brown cartoons, okay? And that could happen. But I really want us to see this text for what it is so we can understand it properly. So Daniel chapter 8, verse 1, it says this. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, so this is still under the Babylonian kingdom, empire is still in practice. A vision appeared to me, Daniel, after that, which appeared to me the first. And I saw it in the vision, and when I saw it, I was in Susa, the capital, which is in the province of Elam, and I saw it in the vision, and I was at the Uli Canal. I raised my eyes, and I saw, and behold, a ram standing on the bank of the canal. It had 2 horns, and both horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. And I saw the ram charging westward and northward and southward, but no beast could stand before him, and there was no one who could rescue from his power. And he did as he pleased, and he became great. Remember, this is symbolic. So there's this symbolic ram with 2 horns. One is big. One horn. They both had big horns, but one horn was bigger than the other one, and it is charging. Okay. Again, this is apocalyptic literature. So here's the second part. Verse 5. As I was considering, behold, a male goat came from the west across the face of the whole earth without touching the ground. And the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. He came to the ram with 2 horns, which I had seen standing on the bank of the canal, and he ran at him and in his powerful wrath. And I saw him come close to the ram, and he was enraged against him, and he struck the ram and broke his 2 horns, and the ram had no power to stand before him. But he cast him down on the ground and trampled on him. and there was no one who could rescue the ram from his power. If you watch nature shows, this is like a vision of giant animals in conflict. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen those Alaskan, an Alaskan television show where like is moose plural of moose? Right? We'll go with that. That's not Mises, okay? That's not right. Moose, right? So the two moose would fight each other, engage in that conflict, and if you could hear it, it sounds loud on television. I can't imagine what it sounds like in person. And if you've ever been around, like, this is an area where there are goats and livestock around. If you've ever seen goats engaged in fighting each other, there's a little bit of happening there, but this is on a massive scale. So you got this big ram, and you got this goat with one horn, which is unusual. At least my knowledge is of goats. Usually they have two, so this one has one. You know, there's some of you out there like, there's a species of goat that has one horn. Great. Tell me about that later. I don't know that species. But that's the vision, is there's these two massive animals coming together in conflict. And you were wondering, I know you were, do you have an artist rendition of this happening? I do. Okay? Straight from Google to your eyeballs. There you go. This is the one we picked, okay? This is not a photo, okay? This is not what Daniel saw in his vision. But you got Daniel here, and you got this. That's pretty gnarly looking goat going after this ram, okay? So this is the vision that he sees. Does that make sense? Now we're done with the visuals, but just make sure you have that in your mind. Going back to verse 8 of Daniel chapter 8. Verse 8 says, "And then the goat became exceedingly great. But when he was strong," this is after the goat ran fight, okay? Verse 8, "Then the goat became exceedingly great. But when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and instead of it, there came up 4 conspicuous horns towards the 4 winds of heaven. And out of one of them was a little horn, which grew exceedingly great towards the south, and towards the east, and towards the glorious land," which is talking about Israel. "It grew great even to the host of heaven. And some of the host and some of the stars it threw down to the ground and trampled on them. And it became great, even as great as the prince of the host. And the regular burnt offering was taken away from him, and the place of his sanctuary was overthrown. And a host will be given over to it together, and the regular burnt offering because of transgressions. And it will throw truth to the ground, and it will act and prosper. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the one who spoke, 'For how long is the vision concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgressions that make desolate, and the offering, or the giving over of the sanctuary and host to be trampled underfoot?' And he said to me, 'For 2,300 evenings and mornings, and the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state.'" Now that is weird, right? So let me just summarize real quick in case you lost me for a minute. There is this vision, which is meant to talk about future events or interpret current events. And in this particular case, this vision is meant to talk about future events that were to come. There's 2 empires that are going to rise. Okay? These empires are represented by these animals. You got ram versus goat. Ram's big and pretty gnarly, but then the goat shows up. The goat with one horn. The goat with one horn, they fight, and guess what? The goat with one horn wins and tramples on that. And then, just as the goat got super strong, it died and its horns were broken, and then it became into 4 horns. And then out of the 4 horns comes one horn, a little horn that is a bad news. And this little horn is going to come, and he's going to defile God's sanctuary, and there's going to be offerings that are strange to God and that God hates on the altar of God. And this is going to go on for 2,300 days and evenings. Now that's weird. Thankfully, we have God giving us a little bit of interpretation, because in the next following verses, these different entities are identified. Look at verse 15. "When I, Daniel, had seen the vision, I sought to understand it. And behold, there stood before me one having the appearance of a man. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai, and it called, said, 'Gabriel, make this man understand the vision.'" So we got the angel Gabriel here who's about to help Daniel understand. Because I don't know about you, but if I had a vision in which I saw 2 giant animals fighting, and then one animal had these horns that turned into a person, I would be very concerned about my mental health, okay? I would be very concerned. I'd be like, what did I eat the night before? Like, no more Jimmy John's, okay? It would be like, did I go to Golden Corral? This is after effects of my poor decision. What is this happening? And so this is a vision from God. And so God has to throw him a lifeline here. And so the angel Gabriel is going to speak and let him know this vision. Thank God for that, because if not, we would be wildly speculating about this. But God gives us some interpretation. I'm telling you, are you with me? Are you with me? Everybody with me? Because if you can get through this, it's going to help you. I promise. You got to believe me. We get down to verse 17. So Gabriel comes near where I stood. And when he came, I was frightened, and I fell on my face. But he said to me, understand, O son of man, that the vision is for the time of the end. And when he had spoken to me, I fell into a deep sleep with my face to the ground. But he touched me, and he made me stand up. And he said, behold, I will make known to you what shall be at the latter end of the indignation. For it refers to the appointed time of the end. And as for the ram that you saw with the two horns, these are the kings of Media and Persia. So, we got an identification here. The ram that had the two big horns, but one was bigger than the other, it's the Medo-Persian Empire, which has been talked about in Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7, represented by these different wild beings. And in this case, in Daniel chapter 7, the Medes and the Persians were represented by this bear. You remember the bear? If you don't, go back and check it out. It's in Daniel chapter 7. There was this bear, and the bear was raised up on one side, and one side was down, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth. Well, in each of these situations, it talks about the Medo-Persian Empire, which took over the known world after the Babylonians, was a coalition between the Medes and the Persians. Now, the Persians were way more powerful, and that's why their horn is bigger in this situation. So this ram that was going to come and is going to take over Babylon. So he's telling you this event is going to happen, and they're going to come, and they're going to take over Babylon, they're going to take over the world. And that's what we actually see in history, that the Persians become the next great empire on the face of the planet. And that's exactly, so now you've got that. So that is who that is. The second part is this, in verse 21 of Daniel chapter 8, says this, and the goat is the king of Greece. And the great horn between his eyes is the first king. So we got the rams that are meeting the Persians. The goat with the one horn is the Greeks and the Greek Empire. And the horn in the middle represents this particular king who is exceedingly great and would take over the Persians and would really take over the world. Because it says this goat doesn't even touch the ground. That's how fast it moves. And we know from history that this is fulfilled in a guy by the name of Alexander the Great. Now, if you've taken Western Civ, or if you are familiar with movies, there have been movies about this man made, and Alexander the Great basically was a young man who took over the world by his mid-30s. I think he died at about the age of 33, 35. And he would come through, and he took over, after the Medes and the Persians had their reign, it was the time Alexander came in. He took over the entirety of the known world and overthrew the Persians by the age of 33. Now, when he dies, and it goes on a little further, verse 22, it says this, as for the horn that was broken in place, which 4 others arose, 4 kingdoms shall arise from his nation, but not with his power. Alexander, after he conquers the known world and is known as Alexander the Great, that is a good thing to be put, like his last name was not the Great, right? That is a description of of his person, because he was so great, he overcame the world in just 3 short years. But at the age of 33, he died. And so what do you do with his kingdom? Initially, it gets divided by his kids, and then his kids couldn't handle it, so what happens is it gets divided by 4 other generals. And so these four, and if you look back in Daniel chapter 7, there's that 4-headed leopard, which represents Greece. This is another fulfillment of that. After Alexander the Great takes over, and he dies, his kingdom is going to be divided into 4 kingdoms. Now, there's a whole bunch of kings. I have their names. If you want to know their number, I'm glad to tell you. But there's no use in me struggling through pronouncing these names right now for you. Just go ahead and believe me throughout history. If you want to look them up, you can Google it, okay? Or I'll be glad to tell you, these 4 kings take over and they rule after Alexander dies. And the Greek Empire loses its power, but it's still somewhat in power. And then, verse 23, and at the latter end of their kingdom, after these 4, the latter end of Alexander and the Greek reign with these other 4 kings, at the latter end of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their limit, a king of bold face, one who understands riddles, shall arise. His power shall be great, but not by his own power. And he shall cause fearful destruction, and shall succeed in what he does, and destroy mighty men and the people who are the saints. By his cunning he shall make deceit prosper under his hand. And in his own mind he shall become great without warning. He shall destroy many, and he shall even rise up against the prince of princes. And he shall be broken, but by no human hands. And the vision of the evening and the morning that has been told is true, but seal up this vision, for it refers to many days from now. And so this is the idea that after Alexander takes over, he dies, his kingdom is separated into 4 kingdoms. There's going to be this other king that rises up through the Greek Empire, which is now not as strong as it was under Alexander. There's going to be this other king that's going to rise at the end of the Greek Empire. He's going to be this little horn who causes all sorts of problems. Now, I'm going to call this guy the second little horn. You know why? Because if you go back to Daniel chapter 7, there's this other little horn. Now, the little horn of Daniel chapter 7 is probably the Antichrist, okay? Which you go back and you can look at, it's one who opposes Christ. And there's this man of lawlessness that will come in the last days, as we understand and we see in the scripture. And that's probably who that's referring to. But that little horn in Daniel chapter 7, comes from the time of the Roman Empire, or at least through in that age. This little horn comes during the time of the Greeks. And he is likely this guy who I mentioned last week, but there's some debate on some interpretations of Daniel, but this is one of the ones people are like, we got this one. We know who this is. And his name is, he's going to rise out of the Greeks. He's going to be one of the last rulers of the Greek Empire. His name is going to be Antiochus Epiphanes IV. What a name. Antiochus Epiphanes IV. And in true keeping, he is a man who does great harm to God's people. And I want to give you his resume so that you can see that he fits the bill of all that is said. And here's his resume real quick. So if he was going on an interview, this is what he would type up and hand to somebody. Here's my resume. So here it is. He was the eighth king of the Seleucid dynasty, which is the dynasty that came after Alexander the Great. Okay? It's Greek. Which was itself one of the 4 powers into which the Greek Empire was divided after the death of Alexander. So it fits that bill. Second thing, remember this little horn that comes out, he was a man of treachery. And here's what happened. Antiochus, he usurped the throne from his nephew and immediately launched a ruthless campaign across the Near East, which eventually he came into control of Jerusalem, which is that holy promised land that we see here in the Bible. Not only that, he was a man of great military might, and he invaded Egypt in about 169 BC. So that's a big deal. I mean, pyramids, that they were known as a big society. Then in 175 BC, he began to, right at the beginning of his reign, he began to persecute the Jews and kill the Jews. In fact, he outlawed their worship in their temple in Jerusalem. Eventually, the temple would be rebuilt. It was destroyed at the beginning of the book of Daniel, right? At the beginning of the book of Daniel. But now it gets rebuilt later on, which we're going to see. It gets rebuilt during the time of the Persians. And God's people go back and inhabit Jerusalem, and they're worshiping. And then he comes in and he kills one of the high priests, puts his guy in charge, and he begins to persecute the Jews and won't let them sacrifice, and won't let them circumcise their kids, and won't let them worship. And then finally, his greatest sin, which is known in the scriptures as the abomination of desolation. Doesn't that sound like bad? You don't want to be guilty of the abomination of desolation. That's what this is, what happened. In December of 168 BC, Antiochus came and he seized Jerusalem by treachery, and because he was frustrated by a failed military campaign, so he's going to take it out on the Jews. And so he sent in his general with 20,000 troops into Jerusalem, and in the temple that had been rebuilt, he sets up an altar to worship Zeus/Jupiter inside of where God is supposed to be worshipped in the Holy of Holies. Not only does he set this up, and this is a big deal, because in Judaism and in the scriptures, in the Old Testament scriptures, you are supposed to have no other gods. And there's supposed to be no idols, especially in the temple where God is to be worshipped. There should be no idol set up, but he sets up this giant idol. Not only that, but then he sacrifices a pig on the altar. Now, you may not know a lot about Judaism. One thing you should know is that pigs are a no-no. Thank God we live in a time where He has made all things clean, and those who trust Jesus can enjoy bacon to the glory of God. I may have pork today just because God made all things clean. Just for you. It's not going to be any other reason. It's not going to be for my enjoyment. It's just because I'm just rejoicing in God. I may have some bacon today. Okay? But to the Jews, this was the worst. It was an unclean animal they could not eat, and this animal was sacrificed on the altar that was supposed to be there for them to kill clean animals for the remission of their sins. Not only was this guy that bad, he persecuted those of faith. He believed that he was God in the flesh. In fact, how do you know that? Well, the money that he had printed during his reign had a picture of him on it, which has got to be weird to see your face on a coin, right? But not only that, but here's the inscription. It was not "In God We Trust" or anything like that. His was in Greek, Theos Epiphanes, which is how he got the name Antiochus Epiphanes, which literally translated means God made manifest. That is proud, right? Like, what's my name? My name is God made manifest. So he thought of himself as God. And that's why he thought he had the audacity to interfere in people's worship. And he had the audacity to make the claims that he made. So this guy fits the bill of everything the little horn would do in this particular situation. And also what we can see here is he's going to be mentioned several other times, and that thing that he did with putting the idol up and sacrificing the pig is going to be known as the abomination of desolation because it made the temple unclean. And I want you to see something here. I told you, if you bore with me and you kind of identified all these players, it would help. And I want you to see this. He represents here a type of a government body or an official who would go against God and God's people. Not just that, but would do harm on all of God's created persons. In fact, I want you to know this. Government is given by God. That's what we see in Daniel. These nations rise and fall. Do you know why? It's not because they get enough military might, which is they do, but it's because God gave Jerusalem over to Babylon. And then eventually, you've had enough Babylon, and so now I'm going to give this empire of the world to the Medes and the Persians. And after the Medes and the Persians have sinned enough and have ruled enough, he's going to say, you know what? Now it's time for Alexander the Great and the Greeks to rule. And they're going to rule for a time, and then Titus is going to come, and he's going to be allowed to have power, but then it will be taken away at some point. And I want you to see this and know this about government. And it's particularly important now that we are in this election season. Just know this. Government is given by God. Go to Romans 13 as well. And government is given by God for our good. However, government is not God. Government is given by God, but it is not God. And so if government or ruling authorities tell us something, mandate something that we ought to do that goes against our faith, then we have the duty to obey God rather than man. Now I want to caution you here, though. I want you to be courageous, but I don't want you to be stupid. I want to be courageous, but I don't want to be stupid. So here's the thing. Even if the government, as a person of God, even if the government says to do something that is ungodly, that does not mean the godly are to pick up swords against the government. Where do you get that at? Well, when Jesus showed up on the scene, and he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, about to be betrayed and go to the cross, he had this hothead with him. You know any hotheads in your life? That person who's like, I'm going to lay you out. Okay? It says something you don't like. You know that person who's going to... I had a friend of mine who's a redheaded Irishman, and he sees something going on. He's like, man, let's go. And I'm like, I don't know if we want to get in a fight with those guys. But he's like, they disrespected that girl. I'm like, I know, but maybe she's fine now. She's in her car. He's like, we got to fight them. I'm like, I'll go with you. You know people like that. They got the hothead. So there's a hothead with Jesus named Peter. They go to arrest him, and what does he do? Grabs a sword, and he's swinging for the neck, but he gets the ear, and he locks the guy's ear off. arrest Jesus? Shouldn't that be the dumb, like that's a dumb statement, right? The Son of God, sinless Son of God. Is it a sin to arrest Jesus and accuse him of a crime? Can we agree on that? Yeah. Okay? It's a sin. It's wrong. It's a miscarriage of justice. The whole crucifixion is a miscarriage of justice. Jesus did not deserve the cross. Peter's like, Jesus doesn't deserve it, so he goes and he tries to defend Jesus. And what does he do? Peter, you missed his neck, buddy. You got to go for the jugular. No, that's not how it went. Really? It's really exciting. No, he says, my kingdom is not of this world. Put away your sword. And then Jesus picks up the dude's ear and reattaches it because it's Jesus. So we have there a non-violent resistance that is to take place amongst the people of God. And we must realize that government is given by God for good purposes, to keep us safe. But when government believes it's God, the people of God must stand for the truth. But let us be careful that our stance is not militant and it's not violent, but it is supposed to be done in the power of the Spirit and in faith. I think that's very important to know, because this man right here is coming in, this little one, it's part of history, and there are going to be rulers and government that claim to be God, or at least act like they're God. And that we must resist as in faith and with wisdom, knowing how we ought to resist and knowing when we ought to resist. Now, when, I don't know. But there are times. And we see that in our day. There are some that are trying to, like in California, there's some real difficulties, and even in Washington, D.C., there are people, it seems like that the government's overstepping their bounds and telling churches what they can and cannot do in freedom of worship. And so there are many people right now trying to know what stance to take. And I ask you right now to pray for wisdom, but also to know that we have to stand with courage, because God has given us government, but government is not God. And that's exactly what we see with Antiochus. And then I want you to see this. He's come and he fits the bill, and he is this little horn we see here. He's going to persecute God's people for a time. But note this: every evil rule and ruler will come to an end. Every evil rule and ruler will come to an end. But wait a minute. Matt, what if it lasts a long time? But doesn't every rule and ruler come to an end? Isn't that what this book is teaching us? That it was a time for the Babylonians to rule the world. And then it's a time for the Medes and the Persians to rule the world. And then it's time for the Greeks to rule the world. And then there's going to come this terrible beast that's going to rule the world for a while. It's going to be the Roman Empire, right? And they ruled for a long time. But you know what? Are you a Roman citizen? Am I a Roman citizen? Very few people in the world are Roman citizens. You know why? Because they no longer rule the world. Because rulers and rules come and they go. That's just the nature of the world. They have been. So we should not be surprised at it. Have you ever tried to understand what's happening in like Eastern Europe before, like after the fall of the Soviet Union? I don't even know what countries are there. They change names all the time. Is anybody else get confused about that? They'll mention some country on the news, and I'm like, I didn't even know that was a country. There are all these stands, Opportunistan or whatever. That's not even one. You know what I'm talking about? I didn't even know that was there. History is proving yet time and time again that the ideas of nations rising and falling in the scriptures are there. And evil rules and rulers will come to an end. And even if this rulers lasts for a long time, which Antiochus is a type of the Antichrist to come, of just a terrible ruler who persecutes the people of God. And Jesus is going to talk about this in Matthew chapter 24. But here's the thing. All rules and evil rulers will come to an end. You know why? Because God will make all things right at one day. And that one. So let me give you a way of encouragement. I try to exercise. I hope you get to as well. When you get to I don't like to run for no purpose. I always liked running when it was like for basketball, or football, or frisbee, or whatever. But for its own sake, there's just a certain level of people that like to run for their own sake. You know, it's like those kids that do cross country, which I've always admired kids that do cross country and track. But their sport is everybody else's sport's punishment. Like, you know what I mean? Like, when you got it. And I knew that when these kids would finish, when I was a youth pastor, I'd go and I'd go watch their cross-country thing, which is love. Like, if you're a track parent, you know it's love to go to those things because they're not fun. Okay? Baseball game, you can see what's happening. But if you're in track, I love you. God bless you. But here's the thing. We saw the kids on cross-country twice during the whole time because it was 2 laps. And then at the end, they are so just worn out. They're about to throw up. And you can't really go up and talk to them because you're worried about what might come out of it. Okay? And and so anyway, to stay healthy, we have to do things we don't like to do. And one of those is I run on a treadmill. And so when I run on the treadmill, if I know, I've said I'm going to run for 30 minutes, run for 45 minutes, I know how to pace myself. And I also know, like, hey, I can make this. I only got 15 more minutes. I can do anything for 15 minutes. However, if you were just running with no end point in sight, it's really hard to keep going. Right? Because you can't see the end. I want the people of God to see this in the scriptures. All evil rule and rulers will come to an end, so we can endure now, because there is a day coming. This won't be how it is always. So, in an election season, where everybody is cast into, if this person wins, they're evil, and if this person wins, it's evil, and if this person wins, basically, it's on either side. If this candidate wins, it's the end of the world. That's what both sides are saying. Somebody, half of the country is going to feel like the world's ending. Okay? It might be. I don't know. It will end one day. Okay, we do know that. Jesus is going to rule and reign. But you can make it for 4 more years or 8 more years, no matter what happens. But you know why? Because all evil rule and rulers will come to an end, and God will judge justly. That is not called inaction. That's a call for you to know you can keep running the race of faith, because this will not be how it is always. I think that's a good word. Finally, I want you to see this: the power of predictive prophecies. And here's why I'm saying this rule will come to an end, and that there's a prediction right here. Notice, we'll go down here. It says in this time, and go back to verse 14. Or 13, rather. Then I heard, this is back to the vision, then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the one who spoke, "For how long is the vision concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgression that makes desolate, and the giving over of the sanctuary and host to be trampled underfoot?" So the question is, how long is Antiochus going to reign and do these evil things to the Jewish people of God? How long? And the answer is, and he said to me, for 2,300 evenings and mornings. He's probably open for like 3 weeks, but he got 2,300 evenings and mornings. Then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state. Now, question remains, how do we understand that? If you did some math, there's how many days in a year? 365, 366 on a leap year. If you follow this exactly, there's 2 ways to interpret 2,300 evenings and mornings. Okay? One is to say each of the evenings and mornings represents a 24-hour day, 24-hour period. So that means 2,300 24-hour days, which, if you did the math, I didn't have to do this math, thank God it was done for me. Okay, I would have probably taken off my shoes and taken a vacation day. Okay, but here's the deal. It was 6 years and 111 days. How long is this going to last? And it says 6 years and 111 days. That is not great, but that's not 7 years. Or 20. Let's think about that. There's a second way to understand this, which is to understand it as 1,115 days and 1,150 evenings, which would basically take that 6 years and 111 days and cut it down in half, which means it would be 3 years and 55 days. You following me? Sure you are. Okay. The main point of this is that this happens. Antiochus goes in and does this terrible desolation in the temple, and it is in 168 BC. However, there's a guy named Jacobius Maccabeus, which you can look him up. He's very important to the Jews. He would reconsecrate the temple almost 3.5 years to the date of when Antiochus killed the pig. He would reconsecrate, make it holy again. Not only that, taken down. If you go back, I think it's verse 25, it says he won't be taken down by human hands. It's going to be this. You know when he dies? Young, inexplicably in his sleep. Which is he died of natural / maybe divine causes here. Which shows that every evil kingdom will come to an end. And it also shows the power of predictive prophecy. What is a prediction? Many of you, like me, are football fans. Now, ladies, and some men, some of you just turned me off right now. Oh, here's what I'm talking about sports. Give me a second, I'll give you an illustration. But this is for all my sports people out there. We, as sports folks, we can't just watch the game. We have to know who's supposed to win the game. Which makes no sense. You know why? Because just watch college football. Because Mississippi State beat LSU, the defending champs, yesterday. Who'd have thought that? Nobody. Now, if you don't care about that, God bless you, okay? You've got more time to do more productive things. God bless you, okay? But they prognosticate and they think, and if that's not your bag, maybe your bag is politics. So they predict who's going to win, and they do these straw polls of who's going to win, and they predict. Do they ever come right? No, they rarely do. The weather. They got Dopplers. They got satellites. And they're like, oh, we didn't know it was going to rain. Okay? You know that's true. A friend of mine out in Colorado posted, one day out there it was 95 degrees. The next day it had snow flurries. You can't predict that. Just ask a person from Colorado if they can predict the weather. The answer will be no. It's what's going to come off the mountain. We try to predict a lot of things. We can't. But let me help you understand what is happening here in Daniel. This should be taken as Daniel making a prediction. Now, there are many quote-unquote liberal scholars. I want to define liberal correctly, okay? Because when you think of a liberal nowadays, you immediately go to politics. Go ahead and when you're talking about the Bible, go ahead and delete liberal and politics from your thinking. A liberal person in biblical theological studies is someone who does not believe the Bible to be true and is very antagonistic towards the Bible and believes that most of it was written later than it actually was. Do you know why? They believe, and they believe that most all of the events that are future predictions in the Bible are not really future predictions, but they were written later on by people who just are pretending to know the future. And they're writing it to encourage people. It's like giving you the predictions after the fact. It's like me coming on Monday morning and be like, yep, I called it. Mississippi State had LSU. And then me acting like I made this prediction, which is ridiculous. So here's the deal. Many liberal scholars believe Daniel was written after the events described in the book. Now, they don't have any substantial evidence that Daniel didn't write this book and it was written later after all the events that are predicted occurs. However, they do this because in their worldview, they believe that telling the future is impossible. They have ruled out a supernatural answer as to why Daniel / God was able to accurately describe these future events. They have no faith, thus they will miss out on seeing the great God who works through faith. And I want you to see this. The Bible is clear. And I think there's no reason not to believe that Daniel did not write the book of Daniel. There's good historical attestation that he wrote this book. And that all of the predictions in this book happened before the events occurred. Do you know why these liberal scholars kick against this idea so much? It's because Daniel is so accurate into what happened. And for them, if God knows what will happen, then God is in control of all that happens. And they can't live with a worldview that says that God's in control and not their own intellect. If you ask me, that is the epitome of pride. And I ask you, even if you're a skeptic of this Bible, to take it at face value and then to evaluate its claims. Because the Bible is claiming that this is a future prediction. And I believe it is a future prediction. And I believe these things came true. And I can show you, we see time and time again how these things came true in the world And especially, the greatest prediction was how the Christ was going to come and how he was going to pay for sins. And we see that in the scriptures. And I want to be clear. God predicts the future because he controls the future. So if you believe that God knows the future, he controls the future, and that's a big God, and that has demand on yours and my life that we can no longer be the captain of our own ship, but he has to be the God of our life. And we will make we do all sorts of mental gymnastics to think that we still have control of our life. And what it boils down to is a heart that is stiff-necked against God. I want you to know that there's power in the gift of prophecy. And finally, I told you, I think this is going to be the most helpful part of this message today. It's in verse 27. We read this last time. After the vision in Daniel chapter 7, Daniel is totally devastated by what he saw. This happens again in Daniel chapter 8. And I, Daniel, was overcome, and I lay sick for some days. Then I arose and went about the king's business, but I was appalled by the vision, and I did not understand it. So he sees all this weird stuff. And have you ever watched a Christian movie before? Christian movies are usually bad movies. Do you know why? Because there's never any chance of the hero falling into actual peril. And everything is all tied up so neatly in the bow at the end. And everybody says exactly the right thing at exactly the right time. And at the end, it's like, I know my God. It's like this long monologue about how God is the ruler of all. And that is true, but that is not how life is. Right? Daniel, after he sees all these things, it's not like, and I rose up that day with a mighty vigor. And I told everyone that God is in control. And I smiled and hummed, and I kept singing, God is so good. I mean, that was me. Does it say that? After he saw this, he lay sick in the bed for some days. He doesn't even know how many days. Then he got up and did what he was supposed to do. But this cloud, what was coming in the world, hung over him. So we could have left it there. We could have gone, you're right. Government is given by God, but government's not God. That's right. All you rulers, they're going to come to an end. Yes! Pumped! Let's get some ice cream. Man, there's power in predictive prophecy. God called it. He's in control of it all. History will go according to his plan, and I'm his, and he is mine. And I have firm foundation that he will rule forever. We could leave it there, but the scriptures don't, which I think is helpful. Because the man of God here is deeply, deeply troubled and distressed. And I want you to know this. And I think why this is something that you need for your soul. God's people get depressed. God's people get down. God's people lay in bed. I don't think Daniel got like COVID, okay? That's why he was in the bed. I don't think he had the flu. This sickness was because of his mental state after seeing what he saw. I think it's fair to say that. He was exhausted. He had these symptoms of depression. And it was due to this massive vision that he saw. And God's people get depressed. If you look through the history of Christianity, especially men of God who are been vocational missionaries or ministers, dark nights come. Sometimes the fog of darkness and depression does not lift for even years. Some of the greatest men of faith of all time. Elijah, after he had done all the great things for God, eventually a lady named Jezebel came after him, and he went and sulked and hid in depression. What did God do? He ministered to him. And eventually he called him out of his depression and into faith. So I want to let this be known to you today that sometimes God's people get down because of the circumstances of life, because of the circumstances of this world, because of the grimness of life, because of difficulties, because maybe we don't have our eyes on Jesus. Maybe that's not the reason. Maybe it's just because life is hard. Stuff stinks. And we're in a broken world, and we're waiting for the king to redeem things. And even this man who has confidence and has seen the vision and has an angel open up heaven and said, this is what's coming. He's thinking about what's going to come on his countrymen through Antiochus and all of the turmoil in the world, and he is sick and depressed. Boy, that fits us, right? It has been a non-stop beat down on the senses for this entire year. And there have been dark nights of your soul and my soul. And maybe you're hanging in there too. But I just want to acknowledge this today that God's people do get depressed. But, and that's the thing about depression and anxiety and being down. We believe things that are not true when we're in that state. We can only see the darkness. And so it's very important when you're like this. It's like this. You feel lonely, so what do? You isolate more. Why? Because we believe the lies, and we believe the tiredness, and we don't feel like we can put ourselves out there anymore. Right? But what helps people who are down and depressed, especially God's people, it's to be with God's people, meeting in corporate worship and meeting in small groups. That actually helps. It's amazing. Most Wednesday nights when our guys group gets together, I think it's a struggle for every guy to get there. And you're invited, by the way. If you're a man here, you're invited to this group, and I'll invite you personally. We meet at 7:30, and it's always a good time. And some of you think, 7:30? Oh, my gosh. How late do you guys go? We go kind of late, okay? Just look, I'm being honest with you. Okay? Study the scriptures. It's really, it's a good time. But I can't give up that amount of time. I'll just tell you something. Every time we roll into that, most of us look like death. We both feel like death, and you know what happens usually every time we leave? I'm so glad we came. Why? Because we had fellowship together around God's word and in prayer. And there are so many things we do. We believe lies. We're depressed and down, and the world seems dark, and no hope seems to be available. And that's not what happened with Daniel. Daniel was overcome, and he lay sick for some days. God's people get depressed. But in faith, God's people get back up and go to work. Because what happens? Then I arose. We don't know how long. We just got some days. Week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I don't know. Some days. I think that's on purpose. Then I arose, and I went back about the king's business. Even though he knew that kingdom was about to fall, because he's working for the Babylonian king right now, and he knows the Persians are coming. He got up and he did his work. And he was still appalled by the vision, and he didn't understand everything, but he kept walking in faith. I think that's the word that because a lot of times we show up to church and sometimes we feel like we can't come to church. It's really hard to go to church because we feel like we got to put our best foot forward. It's like, we did everything we can to get here. Now you can put on a smile even though we were yelling at each other on the way here. And we're going to come to church, we're going to smile, and say, how you doing? You're going to peace be with you. We're not even Catholic, but you're going to say that. And you got to feel like you got it together. Thanks be to God. He's a God of grace. He's an all-knowing God. He knows what went on in the car before you got here. He knows what went on in your house this week. And he knows the state of your soul. And he gives grace upon grace. And so it is a reality that God's people get down. But hear me. You can't stay there. Amen. You can stay there for some days, but you can't live there. At some point, you got to get back up and do the work, because God has a plan and purpose for you. And this is most clearly seen in Jesus, like this: "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, I'll give you rest, because my burden is easy and my yoke is light." So here's how I like to wrap up today. It's very unusual, and we may still hear kids in the hall. It's okay, because God can hear over the kids for our prayer. So here's the thing. I just want to pray for you this morning. And how I'm going to do this is I'm going to ask you to bow your head and close your eyes. I'm not doing anything weird, okay? I'm going to, please nobody look around. I'm going to mention a few things. And if that's you, I I'm going to ask you to raise your hand, and I'm going to pray for, not you by name, okay, don't worry about that, but you raise your hand as you, God knows. So I'm going to lift up that situation. If this is you, then you'll raise your hand. I'm going to pray over you. So let's bow our heads. First, if there is anyone who is weary, if you are weary right now, that is the state of your soul, would you raise your hand? If you are weary. God, I pray right now for my brothers and sisters in this place who are weary. Pray for myself as well. We are tired, whether this is mental fatigue or physical fatigue, we are tired. Help us know that it is okay to have Sabbath rest, to rest in you, and to know that we can lay our burdens down because you are in control and we have everything under control. Give the weary rest, God. If you are in the room today and you would say, Matt, I am just so depressed. I don't feel like I'm here, but my heart is so not engaged. Life is a struggle. If that's you, if you're depressed right now, whether it's clinical depression or just you're just down, would you just slip your hand up? I'd love to pray for you. Father, for those who are depressed, whether that is from physical factors, mental factors, or as a complex mix of all, spiritual issues as well. I pray, God, that you would give man or woman struggling, would you give them peace? Would you let the fog clear? Would you put them in touch with a doctor or a counselor, me as their pastor, to help them? Would you help them see the lies that they're believing? Would you be the great physician to their depression? Would you help them get back up and walk in what you have for them? Help them to know that you have love for them and a plan and a purpose for their life and their life's work. Don't let them be overcome, Lord. Father, Lord, I pray for the person in here who does not know you as Savior. I pray that they would take this seriously, and that today would be the day that they would turn from their sins and say, I renounce those and I trust Jesus. When they call out to you in faith, I pray, and then, God, would they publicly express that? God, I pray that I would be available to them to help them walk in this new faith. Lord, I pray that they would be baptized as a symbol of this new thing that you're doing. God, help us not to leave. Help us not to leave this place without having no business with you. Please lift us up, convict us, encourage us, save those in need of saving. God, do your work, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. As we conclude today, I want to extend a few things. I want to let you know we have youth that's meeting again Wednesday nights at 6 o'clock. I'm going to invite. That's grades 6 to 12. That's available. If you are interested in connecting more with the journey, right now there are two main ways that you can connect more and continue on your journey. Number one is to volunteer to serve some places. Now, you may think, I'm going to volunteer for kids. Well, if you want to volunteer for kids, we got a place for you. But we also, every Sunday after church, we are cleaning up our worship center. If you want to volunteer to help clean up, you can do that. Secondly, also I want you to know we have men's and women's groups, Bible study groups available, discipleship groups available. And I would love for you, if you're interested in one of those, please come talk to me. I'll be glad to get you hooked up with one of those. We want every person to be able to connect with someone else. We believe fellowship is one of the ways that we care for our souls. If you would, let's stand together. And I want us to be dismissed with these words of benediction. This is 2 Corinthians chapter 4. It says, therefore we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, and what is unseen is eternal. Go in that truth. You are dismissed.